How's everybody doing? This is Ryan with Rigs of Death Metal. Today, my guest is Kieran from uh I'll let you pronounce it so I don't butcher it.
Yeah, so my main project is Andracca that I started myself back in 2018. And I also currently play live with Insurgency and Trivax, former being a black thrash band, the other being like a Iranian, Middle Eastern, we've got a UK drummer, but the other two guys are from Iran and Syria. I've been playing with them nearly 6 months now. So those are the main things that I'm currently involved in.
Awesome. Which admittedly and Andracca, my wife recently more recently kind of showed to me. Which I actually really dig. It's it one thing I'll say about the recordings that I actually really enjoy is that they kind of capture sort of an old school vibe without sounding as bad as old school.
Yeah, that's going for. The recording setup for that EP was actually quite fun. So I have like a Laney Ironheart, like the studio rack mount things, that have
Yeah,
like a DI output where you can turn the cab emulation off to use your own IRs on them. So I ran it without a cab IR on it, but then I also had a cab mic'd up on like the same performances. So there's like a mix of fucking horrendous no cab IR signal, which is all the hiss and fizz and noise and shit, and then sort of balanced with like a nice sound. But it actually worked really well. There's literally zero EQ on the guitars on that release. That's all. We just put the two together and they just worked really nice. But yeah, I was trying to make it sound big, but also EV was fucking horrible. So, yeah, I was really happy with how that.
that's actually really interesting to me. Is that the case on um yeah, Sermon and the Universal Language of Suffering, like
Yeah,
that
yeah. So
EP? That,
yeah, so the release before that, the first one, I,
mhm.
th- I think that was done with like a mix of like a Black Star HT5 and some parts might have even been on tube. I'm not too sure. I wasn't as happy with the production on that, and
Gotcha.
it was quite different approaches.
That's that man, that's interesting to me because like I was listening to it thinking like, man, they've actually got like a pretty cool like room sound kind of blended into this. So that's hilarious that it was a DI recording. I love that.
Yeah, and, like there is a lot of reverb on the guitars, like all the time. So yeah, basically for black metal stuff. But yeah, especially the drums I tried to make sound in a room. But they were actually cold drums, like cold drums too. Just with a lot of processing on them. But yeah, I was really happy with how the drum sound turned out, especially it sounded a lot better.
Oh yeah. Well, that's actually a pretty awesome trick I'll have to keep in mind because we'll do some, especially when I'm doing like gear demos, I try to do different styles of tunes for most of them where, something thrashier, more black metal, more Cannibal Corpsey, whatever. Um, so is the which by the way, I love the JCM 2000 behind you. I used to own one and it's one of my favorite heads. Is that just more your live use? Like haven't got to use it for any recordings yet or
So we've got an album coming out in, I won't be too specific, like very early next year. Um, and that's been all the audio for that was recorded and like finished. I finished mixing it in November last year. Then it went through mastering and stuff. And then it's just album release type of things have been behind the scenes. So I recorded that with the JCM and also like the 15-watt EVH stealth heads. I've got one of those right in the corner.
Mhm.
Um, so I tracked all the performances. It's like a DI from the guitar that I tracked with. and then reamped 6 layers of guitars through both amps in like 2 days. I don't know how. And I do this like in this room. And this is like a flat apartment, whatever you want to call it. And I have no idea how the fuck I do that. It was like 6 hours. It was just ACM at halfway up on the master volume. So I was just sort of setting the album off all in one project file and going downstairs, like 2 or 3 doors closed, and it was still loud as shit. But I didn't get any complaints. I managed to get the recordings, and the idea was to have both amps on everything. But I ended up having like the JCM as like the main guitar parts recorded on that. The EVH on like the second guitar parts that I write that are typically just like an octave lower or something like that, mostly similar to the main riffs. And then there's like melody ambient layers sort of straight down the middle that again the JCM did, just because it made a little bit more room in the mix and made it a bit easier to distinguish between the different parts a bit. So the idea was to just build a massive wall of sound, but everything ended up being a little bit too similar in tone when it was everything on all the time. So there's sort of a blend of like really steering, like not as harsh as the Sermon in the Universal Language of Suffering EP. It's not as raw as that, but like just quite a bright, jagged sort of main tone, and then the EVH is like the gain on it's a lot more clean in a way that's difficult to explain, but it's like less like fizz and hiss around the edges, and it's a little bit clearer, so it sort of sits underneath, and it's a bit easier to distinguish that while you still have a bit of a nastier sounding main guitar sound, and that's worked really, really well. Like I'm super happy with how my albums turned out. So around about the time that this comes out, I imagine people will be able to hear it a few weeks after that. But yeah, so that JCM, that's what I use live now as well. And I generally give the EVH to the guitarist. So it's quite comparable to how the album turned out, where he's playing a lot of the parts that were recorded with that amp, and I'm playing most of the parts that are recorded on the JCM. And I fucking love this amp. It's so good. I had traded it for a guitar that I hadn't used for a long time. It's the only guitar I ever got rid of. And then I just turned it on, and it's just the sound of every band that I love in a box. Like, wind the gain down a bit, and you sound like AC/DC. You turn it up a little bit, and you sound like you're in Judas Priest or something. And then you put an overdrive in front of it, and it's Slayer and everything. And evil. And it's the best. It's so good.
Yeah, I'll admit I miss mine a lot. Um, it was really really good at nailing like kind of Mastodon, High on Fire kind of tones, especially if you just kind of roll the
So
bass a little bit.
versatile.
Oh yeah.
It's like people do box them in as like a bit of a one thing. Oh, the EQ doesn't do anything. Put an EQ through the effects loop or something, which is what I do with mine, and you can make it do literally almost anything, or at least like almost anything that's worth listening to. In my opinion, like any cool band that I can think of that I love is pretty much always Marshall stuff, Slayer stuff, and stuff. Like even the range between those two bands is Morbid Angel used them. Like, they do everything. So good.
Oh yeah. One popular mod I've seen for the 2000s, which I think they ended up adding it when they put out the DSL series, was instead of doing the deep switch on the 2000, I think they changed it to a knob that you could actually dial.
Yeah, a friend of mine just bought the 20 watt version of those. I've been considering getting that myself, but then I realized only doing it for the sake of art, it takes a little bit less space in the car, and it's not as heavy. Um, just big amps, keep using big amps. Like it'll be the death of me at some point.
Well, I mean, if you're running an
Yeah.
EQ in the loop too, I mean, you're accomplishing probably even more than what that would be capable of
Oh yeah, for
anyway.
sure. Yeah, it's so helpful because when you put it in the loop and it'll change like the gain structure and things rather than just running it through the front like a boost or something. Or like plus minus 10 dB on 7 bands, like it's ridiculous amounts of shaping that you can do with it. Especially like in a live setting, if you end up getting a cab that just sounds like shit, you can most of the time almost save it and make it sound good. Just like cutting out a frequency that's just sounding off or clashing with the room or something. That's definitely the best like 70 quid I've spent on a piece of gear in terms of shaping the sound and things.
For sure. Um, I know. I know Gary Holt was a big proponent of those, and like even now he's using the Silver Jubilee, which doesn't have like a depth or anything like that. And I think he runs like a gut tech pedal that like serves specifically as a depth knob if you run in the loop. And same idea, just something that has like because obviously classic Marshall designs aren't super low end heavy like a dual
Yeah,
rec or a 5150. So just throw some kind of pedal in the loop to try to compensate.
yeah. I mean, I find it rarely needs more than like a dB or two at like the lowest end of
Sure.
the EQ pedal, and then it just widens it a lot. Um, I mean, I still find even though I've not tried out like the proper 50 watt, 100 watt EVH amps, but compared to the 15 watt version, like the low end on it just sounds a lot more open. I'm assuming it's just because it's got a bigger transformer in it, but it just sounds bigger to me. Um, Whereas the EVH, it sounds compressed it almost sounds like a recording of a guitar. Um, when compared to like JCM in the room, it's a little bit difficult to explain. It's almost like in between like JCM and like when I hear like a Kemper profiler being played live or something like that. It
Hmm.
sounds more like it's you know voiced for recording things. And it sounds great and I love it, but yeah, this definitely sounds a lot more old school and a little bit less.
What sorry. What would you say would be like your tone inspiration, like a specific album or artist or anything like that?
It's difficult to say when dialing it in because I don't really have anything like in mind that I'm aiming for, but like definitely most of the influences, like I mentioned, like all the bands that I love are Marshall driven bands like Judas Priest, um, you know, but then anything different, like the difference between Victim of Changes and Defenders of the Faith or something is really big. But I love both of those sounds. Loads of the early Slayer stuff is massively important for me. Um, and then black metal wise, I suppose a lot of it is. I mean, the first thing that I got obsessed with black metal wise was Emperor. I don't know what they use, but yeah, the stuff like Emperor Dissection, like fast riffy things that were like cutting is probably the main one. Things like Stargeist fall into that for me as well. So generally, I try and have just try picking all of the time, pretty much. I still want to be able to hear like when individual notes are changing in chords and things like that. Um, so it's generally got quite a lot of like upper mid attack in it and not massive amounts of low end, but I still want it to sound quite big. Um, so yeah, it's a bit of a mix from all over the place, really. I think like a closer to home influence. I mentioned before, like I played live guitar with Insurgency. Um, that was a band that I was seeing just as a fan when I was in university. So they're based in Lancaster, where I went to university as well. And the main guy in that band, Andy, he's got like an original 800.
Mhm.
And every time that I see them in like a pub where you can fit like 50 people in, the gig room was like an upstairs room. So you'd be sort of drinking downstairs, waiting for the bands to come on. As soon as he turned it off standby, the feedback would just scream so loud, the whole venue, you could just hear it. And then you'd go in there and it was so ridiculously loud and just relentlessly punishing on the ears. That's so enjoyable. Um, that definitely influenced me a bit. So now there's two of us doing that. Don't know how people in the front rows fit, but it always sounds like fucking great. Like we all, even in rehearsal rooms, like those two amps paired together. Um, yeah, just relentless intensity, like, just loud. Like I want it to sound loud, even if it's quiet.
Oh yeah. Um, what would you say serves for your inspiration in riffing and songwriting and like not necessarily copying specific bands, but at least what influences your process?
It's shifted since I've written the album that is coming out. So I actually wrote most of that before the last EP came out. Um, like some of the songs I actually started writing before the very first release came out. Like there's videos of us playing one of the songs in like 2019 with like an entirely different liner other than me. Um, so a lot of those songs were written with a lot of Emperor and Stargeist influences and things like that. There's some like Gorgorothy things in there as well, battery stuff from time to time. And I think if there's anything else in particular that I'm big on. I mean, so towards there was a little bit of a crossover point that happened basically as soon as I was scrolling through YouTube one night and then I clicked on Flesh Cathedral by Swati Dowdy and it fucking like ruined my life for like 3 years. It was so good. Everything else seemed shit. Um, and then like shortly after that, Revelations of the Red Sword came out and that was like even more of that. And then I got into like other Icelandic bands like Mistherming and Wormlust and Andervald and all that sort of stuff. And Aklis as well. Close on the door. Um, so a lot of whereas a lot of my listening black metal wise previously had been like a lot of the first, second wave bands, I've now discovered a massive, huge group of bands that are doing it like currently that have played it in a totally different way, in a way that like enhances the atmosphere of the old stuff. Like it feels similar, like familiar atmosphere wise, but achieved in different ways and different lyrical themes. Less castles, wizards, and forests, and all that, and more like esoteric concepts, I suppose. Um, and that's massively shifted how I started writing since then. Um, so all but one song on the next album is all in E standard, but now I'm writing everything in D standard and incorporating more like dissonant elements rather than like the more like traditional like just single note natural minor scale stuff. Um, so there's a bit of a crossover. Like I still listen to like loads of Emperor stuff and loads of the old school stuff, but um, a lot of what I listen to now and a lot of what seems to come out when I'm playing more now is more like expansive song structures, more dissonant things like strangely layered guitars with like discordant harmonies and things. Um, so yeah, in the last 3 years, there's been quite a big shift. Um, but there's like little glimpses of it in like certain sections of songs off the next album, which is actually quite cool. I didn't plan it that way, but just like as I was tying that album up and finalizing all the parts and things, like bending a note a little bit more on a certain thing to make it sound a little bit more disgusting before it resolves into the next bit, things like that. So there's little sort of glimpses of what I have been writing since finishing the next album. So yeah, it's becoming more dissonant and atmospheric, I suppose.
Hmm. Uh, just out of curiosity, kind of based off of some of your terminology for some of the different musical ideas, do you have a like a trained musical background at all, or is it just developing your ear over time to
I mean, so I started playing guitar when I was like 8 years old. Like, I'm 26 now. So I had guitar lessons up until I was like 13, and then I've been self-taught since then. Um, but then I started teaching guitar like 5 or 6 years ago or something like that. Um, so I'd already built up like theory knowledge, just like researching online and things like that. And just like working things out in the process of writing and recording things. Um, and then obviously I have to teach it, so I have to sort of learn how to communicate it to other people. Um, so I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm trained, but I generally do sort of know what I'm doing. But when I'm writing, I turn all of that off. So in terms of when I write, I don't have a preconceived idea of what I'm trying to do. Really, it's I will literally just turn all the lights off and just play until things start happening, and then once I've got like the core of a song, I can work out what what sort of things I'm generally doing, and then use the knowledge that I've got to inform, like, when I add layers of guitars and things, like what sort of things to add on top of it, or what sort of things to transition into. Um, so it's more of a retrospective thing rather than like, I've never sat down and sort of, pen and paper. If I do this interval and that one, it sounds really evil. It's not like that. So it's more,
Yeah.
retroactively figuring out what I've done, even if it's like on a previous song or something, and then working out if I can play a chord in a different part of the neck to access different notes to play around it and things like that. So it's more of a tool than it's a means to an end rather than informing any of the actual decision making, like creative decision making. So it's a bit of both. I don't want anything to sound like overly sort of formulated and overly planned out. Like I like riffs to feel quite spontaneous. Um, yeah, I guess that's the short answer. I like to keep the writing process spontaneous and then work things out after the fact.
Oh, I mean, absolutely makes sense. Um, there, saying it has like a jam kind of vibe, I feel like is a little misleading. That makes you think like, I don't
Yeah,
know, like Grateful Dead or something, like
okay.
where there's like a lot of improv, but um, I don't know. It does seem to make a difference between something sounding, I guess if you were to go back to like Death Crush, like we were talking Mayhem before we started the recording. If you go back to Death Crush versus something a little bit more grandiose, like a Dimmu Borgir album, because all those guys are classically trained, and it just sounds like this huge, lush like composition. Where Death Crush sounds like a bunch of kids learning how to play their instrument, and there's a certain like push and pull element, I guess, to a lot of the writing that it's something about when you set out to like you are trained, you are setting out to write and compose something with a specific goal in mind. um I don't know, it just takes a completely different form. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's something you
Yeah.
can hear.
Um, I think the main difference for me is like when it feels like when something's really good, but it still retains that spontaneous thing. It feels to me like the band is just really, really good. Whereas when it's like a really over analyzed and like formulaic thing, where it sounds like one guy sat down with like a pen and paper and like, programmed in every note on MIDI or something, and like it just feels really boring to me. It's an issue that I take with loads of modern death metal stuff. Like we spoke about the interview that you did with Kyle a bit before we started as well.
Hmm.
When he was talking about like, the consequences of necrophagist on death metal, it's exactly the same way that I feel. It's like when people are trying to chase technicality and like really intricate things, not just because that's how they play when they play freely. It seems like it sucks a lot of the life out of things. Whereas when you get a band like Morbid Angel stuff is really technical, but you just can't. I can't mentally picture like Trey and Pete sat down working out. What time signature is this riff in, and like picking out what scale are you playing in that. Like they may have done. I might be wrong, but like I just don't see that happening. It still sounds like four guys in a really sweaty storage locker in Florida just smashing riffs at each other until stuff works. Um, yeah, it's like complicated music can be great, really simplistic music can be great. I think a lot of it just comes down to like if that's honestly just what happens when people play, that tends to be what sounds best. Like this Farty Dowdy stuff that I mentioned, there's loads of crazy time signature stuff happening all over that, and the song structures are mind bending. But it doesn't sound forced. Like all of it flows like really, really seamlessly and naturally to me, which it's almost like it makes it even more impressive that they managed to pull that off without it, sounding just fictitious and like too much stuff trying to be crammed into a song. I know that they recorded Flash Cathedral without using a metronome or anything like that, and that might be part of it, just letting things breathe and things like that. But yeah, it's a tough one because I still love things like early Venom and Battery and all that sort of stuff. But
Sure.
then things like Necrophagist are good when they're played really well. But Blood Incantation is another one where it's complicated music, but it sounds just sincere and it performed really great. It still sounds exciting. Like the most recent single that they released was unbelievable. Like the solo at the end of that was insane. And it doesn't sound like he sat there note by note picking out what to do. It almost sounds perfectly improvised, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. Some of my favorite solos ever were, you know, just the correct take, you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
picked out of like and you can watch interviews with almost any guitar here. They'll even tell you, they'll just do multiple takes of a solo and just pick whichever one's the best one. And a lot of times it's one of the first couple. Um,
yeah. It's guitar solos are a tricky one. So there's, there's three, I think, on the album that we'll be releasing. Um, and one of them took me like a couple hours of just doing takes and takes and takes and like working out phrases sort of, and then piecing parts from the different solos together and then relearning it and then re-recording the whole thing. And it came out really great, and I like that a lot. But the last one on the album, I actually didn't plan to play. So I'd done all the rhythm guitar tracking, and I'd been playing for like 6 hours that day. Um, and then it got towards the very end of the song, and I was doing like the little ambient layers that sort of run down the middle. Um, and then it just hit a certain section where I hadn't planned for a solo, and there wasn't any vocals or anything, but a bit of a switch was flipped in my head, and it was like guitar solo, and I just played it, and then it was the first take, yeah, done. And like I actually possibly prefer it to the other one, but it was that was a strange moment. It was spontaneously perfect for what it was meant to be. Um, I don't know if it was because I'd spent 6 hours playing all of the album stuff and I was just really immersed in what I was doing. But yeah, that was a really cool one.
I I'm not sure if I heard it right or not earlier, but so for your all's recordings, is everybody to a metronome or not at all, or maybe just the drummer?
Um, so on the yeah, so it has all ended up being on a metronome because I had to use programmed drums. So a lot of it is sort of on a grid, um, but a lot of the drum parts, like I'd spend ages and ages like humanizing things and not making everything like mechanical sounding. Like that was the main thing I wanted to avoid while using programmed stuff. Um, so like when you listen to the last EP that we did, um, in my opinion anyway, other people might disagree, but it still feels quite natural to me in the timing of things, and I try to retain like elements of like keeping things like not necessarily groovy. It's not like a stoner rock thing or anything like that. sort of get what I mean. Hopefully, like, it's not really
Sure.
like rigid feeling. Um, but yeah, it's we're hoping to get off metronomes for future stuff. Um, but yeah, it's a tricky one to balance. So our current drummer's been with us just over a year now. And a lot of the times he likes in a live setting to have a click in his ears, um, to help keep things consistent while we're still building like familiarity with each other as a live band. But we're hoping to get off that at some point in the future, or at least only use it on particular songs or something where it's particularly needed. But at the moment, it's been a really quick way to make the band sound really, really tight. He actually ended up joining us like a month before we did our first tour. Um, so, and he nailed the tour. Um, so it helped bring the band like really tight, really quick. Um, and I mean, the last few shows that we've done have been for sure the best that I've ever played. Um, so it's definitely a point that I'm super happy with it now. But hopefully in future we'll be able to ease off it a little bit and have a little bit more sort of interplay in like between songs and things like that. Being able to slow down endings, speed up at certain sections, when it's called for, and all the classic Slayer stuff. There'll just be a little 5 BPM increase on one riff, and it just makes it so much more exciting. So if we're able to do that, then that'd be great. So you don't want to be trying to program a metronome to go up 5 BPM at a particular. If you go off one click, it fuck up the whole thing. So um,
Sure.
hope you should be able to do that live. And I think we're probably at a place where we can start.
It's been actually really fascinating and pretty enlightening for me to hear some of like these little tips and tricks for what's basically like kind of like modern day way of songwriting, but ways to kind of introduce at least an old school kind of feel when you don't have the availability of just packing a bunch of guys into a room and recording everything, sort of live, like as was done in the past. Uh,
Yeah, I think a lot of it just sort of came about from the way that I started the band. So I grew up in like North Wales, and like right by the sea, where there is just like no scene or whatever you want to call it. So no one that I knew was even into black metal, let alone like a musician. So I just started demoing stuff at home. Um, I learned how to play I Am the Black Wizards, and it's like, right, that's how you do that. And then I'll just change a few of the notes. And then, I did that for like 2 years, and then that's how like the first release came about. And then the EP that we did, I did that in the middle of COVID, so I couldn't get together with anyone. And then, so that was all done in here. And then, like I mentioned, most of the album was actually written before we released that EP. So we were working on the album leading up to 2020, and then COVID happened. It's like, well, we're not going to be able to finish the album anytime soon, and we don't know how long this will go on for. So um, I'll do a EP. I actually wrote that in like a week. Something to do. But it came out like I remember I did the title track off that in like a Tuesday afternoon before work, and then I walked to work listening to it. So quite catchy actually. And then the rest of that week, I thought I could definitely do another like 3 songs like this. So I did. And then we put that out, and it was like it was well received and it did well. With it. Um, and then we came out of COVID, and then by then it was I pretty much recorded all the guitars and things. Our bassist Phil had started learning all the bass parts and like adding to them and things like that, which is the first time really that another member has been able to contribute in like a really substantial way. Whereas a lot of the time previously, I was doing like everything, down to like on the 2 releases that are out, even the cover art, I did those. Um, so I was doing lots and lots of stuff. Whereas now I'm able to spread responsibility among the band that I've got. Um, you know, we've been together like year and a half with some of the members. Um, so like we've built up a level of understanding where they know what I want them to do, and they can sometimes do it better than something that I would come up with. So it's been nice to not have to carry like the responsibilities for everything. So it's been nice. Like it's been difficult at the same time though, because it's like inviting people in when you've had like 5 years of like I know how to do this band or whatever. But it's been really rewarding when people have been able to contribute. Like once you've got a bit of a foundation, like they've learned a set list already and they're more familiar with the style. We've played live together a lot. It's easier for things to fit in. Because I don't want to be in a position where it's like people coming up with ideas like, no, it's not right. It's not right for the thing. The atmosphere is not right. Um, but that's not been the case now. So people are making contributions that are sticking, which is really good. Because it was never meant to be a solo project on principle. It just sort of was that way, just out of circumstance. So it is. I'm really like super grateful for the guys that I have in the band now because they're all super talented and being really dedicated to it, and the contributions have just been more and more the right sort of thing.
What would you say would be some musical goals that you currently have set for yourself, both personally and within the context of the band?
I'm going to split that into two different things. So I treat the studio thing and the live career thing is quite not entirely separate, obviously, but they're two different realms, I guess, to use a very black metal word. Um, so a lot of the musical stuff, all I want to do with music is just give voice to what's in my head and the way that I feel about certain things or certain topics. So as long as I'm producing music that I can, 100% stand behind, then that's the main thing for me. I don't mind if it sounds like more one band than another or whatever it is. As long as I'm happy with it, then I'm totally fine with it. Um, like the album that we've done falls into that category like really heavily for me. Like there's not really anything that I'd change on it. Not like a single lyric or anything. Um, whereas like in a live setting, achievement wise, um, I don't really think about that when I'm doing the music. Um, but I think that the main things for me for next year and with this next album, we want to start playing in Europe and things like that. Moving over from doing like a show every few weekends or so to doing like more tours and more runs around different countries and things like that, particularly in Europe. Um, so those are the main things that we're probably looking to do next year. Um, and then yeah, musically, as long as I can continue, just satisfying myself, that's the thing that I try and do with this band. Like it's not the easiest thing being in a band, and there has to be a reason to like be in a fucking car with the same three guys for hours and then driving like 4 hours each way for a half-hour set. Like it has to be really worth it. Um, and for the music that I'm writing, it is worth it for me. And the other guys seem to feel the same way, which is it's a good feeling that they're able to get something out of it too, and we're able to experience it all together.
What considering the specific subgenre we're talking about, being black metal, um, it's there seems to be a bit of a geographical debate in some circles, kind of like death metal is between like Sweden and Florida. Black metal, it seems to be between Norway and England. Um, England being, like your Bathory and Venom, going to proto black metal like Venom. Um, so, there's a bit of credibility to both. Obviously, Norway being, you know, kind of the hotbed in the 90s. Um, so I don't know possible bias aside, which camp do you tend to lean towards?
Definitely listen to a lot more Norwegian and Swedish stuff. I mentioned before, like to be honest, mostly I probably listen to Icelandic stuff these days, black metal wise. Um, Whereas with English stuff, in terms of like old school bands, it's probably only Venom that I'd really say that I'm a big fan of. Um, Whereas I fucking hate Cradle of Filth so much. It's difficult to put into words like the the consequences of necrophagus on death metal is one thing, but the consequences for the black metal from Cradle of Filth, man, they really shit the bed on that. Like it's not about like like women dressed in lace and drinking wine and things like fuck that. Like I'm not interested in like vampires and all this shit. If Emperor want to put like a verse about wizards and whatever in a fucking song, that's fine. But like I don't want to watch a music video of Danny Filth like doing weird shit with like Halloween decorations that look like the bought from Mazda. And like I really can't stand Halo. And then the vocals are like another can't stand it. Um, so obviously that's not all English black metal though. But pretty much anything super symphonic other than Emperor, I can't really stand for either. And there was a lot of that after Cradle of Filth. It's gotten a lot better in the UK now though. Bands like Abduction and Ninkasag, like two quite different bands. Abduction have got more, almost more death metal elements being put into them, whereas Ninkasag are a bit more like old school dissection sort of stuff. Um, so like the quality here in particular has gotten a lot better in the last 5 years, I think. Um, but there's still like there's not a particular sound. Like all the bands that are doing really well actually sound quite distinct from one another, which has been really fun. Just, you don't want to hear like the same band 3 times at a show every time you go and play a gig. So it's definitely gotten a lot better. Like our friends in Volunteer have been putting out some really, really good stuff lately. And the demos for their new stuff is really good. And again, there's more like of an aggressive side, like a bit more similar to death metal things. Um, partially because their drummer's not from like a black metal background, like so he's played in like lots of thrash bands and things. So there's a lot more like urgency to a lot of their stuff. So it's been a nice shift from a lot of floaty keyboard vampires and wine black metal to and like shrieky like high pitched like a dog being stepped on vocals, like more powerful vocal deliveries and things. It's definitely gotten a lot better here recently, like noticeably. I mean, like this band only started 5 years ago, but in the time that I've been going to shows, it's gotten a lot better.
I'd say I would tend to agree with you. One of my favorite bands, I'd say they're at least in my top five favorite bands of all time, would be Myrkskog out of Norway. Um,
I think I know those.
they're the singer guitar player, he's played for a few different bands. He was in Morbid Angel there for a while.
Ooh,
Like where like that brief period of the few years where David Vincent came back and they put out the really awful album that no one likes, not even Morbid Angel.
yeah.
Um, Destructor is the guitar player's name, but
Oh yeah, a stage name.
yeah. And then Zyklon is another band of his.
Oh yeah, I know them.
Yeah. So uh, whether it's Zyklon or Myrkskog, it is like one of the more aggressive takes on black metal out there. Like it is just pummeling.
Yeah, it's like when I mean, it goes both ways for me, but when black metal and death metal start crossing over, it's so exciting to me. Like, I don't know if you've checked out Vortex event, um, but that shit is ridiculous. Like footage of their live shows and things. Like, I really, really want to see that band live, but you know, equally like more black and death metal things, like even like Infernal War or Marduk stuff like that. Um, so like when black metal is like bearing all its teeth, like not pulling any punches. Um, that for me is when it is its most. The Icelandic stuff does it in a slightly different way. Um, it's more like everything is wrapped in a dark, smoky shroud, and then you get a bit closer to it, and then you get it fucking kills you.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of black metal is done well to have a lot of the aggression added back.
Um, and then I feel like I mean this is there's definitely a lot of great American black metal bands, but I also feel like American black metal typically gets associated with the like blackened shoegaze kind of like very droning, very atmospheric kind of stuff. And I I'll listen to it on occasion, but I've had enough of them suggested to me to where I was almost immediately burned out. I'm like, okay, these are all just like I don't agree with their politics, but like I love Marduk, like Panzer
Yeah, well,
Division,
yeah, it's the same with like the Infernal War stuff,
sure, but like Marduk,
and
it
it's like
hits so
horrible
hard,
people can make some horrible music. Like
sure,
that's sort of what I'm saying. You know, I might not go out and buy any of the merch or anything like that.
right, but
And really nasty music. That's you know,
to
a good place from. Um, but yeah, like I did actually like Sunbather quite a lot when that came out, the first Death Heaven record. But I liked that a fair bit when it
yeah, I
comparison to
mean,
like it's no
yeah,
contest. Like I've been fortunate enough to see Atlas twice. Um, the last time I got to play with them when I played my first overseas show with Trivax in Germany at Hole in the Sun, and the Atlas guys were playing that the following day, um, and it was just as all like it was literally dusk, and then it came on and their stage setup is really cool. All like the creepy masks and things that they have. And I still remember, like, it was a similar experience when I first found Svarti Dowdy when I first listened to that. It was almost like discovering black metal again, where it sort of scares you a bit. I didn't know music could do that. Um, it was like that experience again, being able to see that they can actually pull that off live, so, especially the drumming. I don't know how that guy does that without like animatronic. American black metal for me is probably maybe two or three bands that I really love. And say two or three. I can't really think of any others that immediately come to mind. It's
hmm,
probably mainly just Acklist. I'm partial to some like stuff and Leviathan from time to time, but I'm not that miserable these days. So you know,
they're I don't know. There's a couple that I'll frequent. People hate on them sometimes. Abigail Williams has some really good albums. Um,
I know that name.
Abigail Williams. They've been around pretty good while. Leviathan. Um, or
They are really good.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, you are pretty great too. I didn't like their last release like as much, but there's certainly nothing
Who was
wrong
that?
with Uada from Portland, I think.
I I was thinking about them, but I've never known how to pronounce their name. It's, I've never heard it spoken
Half
out
guess
loud.
it too. Yeah.
Okay. I'll be trying to pronounce it in my head. I'm like, Ouija dude?
Uh,
I'm
yeah. Are they the Belgian band? I'm still Ouija.
not sure. Um, Kind of steering this back around towards gear. I had a couple more gear topics, and then it dawned on me. We didn't even discuss what your main guitar is at the moment, or guitars.
I have them conveniently. So I'll do the other. So I have two guitars. So what I pretty much write everything on is this Solar like artist series with the other tune and the looming lays and stuff, which was godsend live, like just tuning stability wise, having the confidence to say, no, you're the one that makes out tune. That
Hmm.
was convenient for me. And looming lays. I'm not really exaggerating when I say like I can't see when I play. Um, my hair's really, really thick. And I have to do vocals at the same time too. And I'm kind of high mic position guys, so I'm facing upwards, and my hair will just be all in here. So when I look down, I can't really see what I'm doing unless there's a big glow in the dark thing showing me. Um, so I got this guitar in like 2018, I think. So all of the album was written on this. I've done most of the live shows for the band with this guitar. So I'm quite sentimental about guitars. So this is the one that I tend to write on. And it feels right to me. Like the back of it has been torn to pieces by bullet belts and all that stuff. But it's like a massive see it in it sounds like a really stupid reason. But you can never see it in like any of the live photos. Whereas my bassist has got a big, massive white Fender P bass. Excuse me, and all of his photos looked so cool in black and white. It really annoyed me, and so I thought I'd get an even bigger like, guitar with a big shiny pickguard on it. I picked up this Jackson Rhodes in like, November last year, I think. Um, like I got a bonus from work, and then it lasted like half an hour. And then I got this. So this is now like my main live guitar. Um, but I've really like fallen in love with it. Like it plays superbly well. It's got like a slightly wider fretboard than the Solar, which makes it feels like I've just got a bit more space to do things. Um, and the neck's really nice, like finished neck. So it plays really fast. Obviously, the upper fret accesses can't really get much better. Like there's literally nothing in the way. Um, it looks great. It's easy to move around on stage, like balance it on your leg and things to get like guitar moves, whatever. And then obviously it's got the Floyd on it, which is quite funny because obviously I've written everything on the guitar without one. So throughout the set, I don't really get to use the Floyd. But at the end of a set, like lots of, it sounds like a really bad Morbid Angel. Drum fills and dive bombs and with far too much delay on things, which is fun to do. But I have started writing like bits and pieces on it. To like break out of like habitual writing things that seem to come about more when I use a guitar that I've owned for longer.
Hmm.
Um, so I'll like try out more ideas on that and try and incorporate things that I can do on that guitar that I can't do on the other and things. But yeah, I've really kind of, especially in live settings, um, it stands out visually. It sounds great. It looks great. It stays in tune a lot better than I thought it would. I was a bit anxious about moving from like an Evertune to a Floyd. sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum a bit, but
Yeah.
it tends to actually work really well. So I've been fortunate, like there's been no disasters. Well, yeah.
Hell yeah. Um, both of them still pretty much bone stock. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hell
it's
yeah.
yeah, they're both working guitars.
I
Yeah,
will
it's
say,
about
I will say where a Rhodes is probably one of the most popular metal shapes out there. That's probably one of my more favorite Rhodes that I've come across. I love the white with the kind of mirror chrome pick guard.
I was really hyped when I found it. Well, I had a bit of a saga actually getting it, so I found one like from a store online, and they said it was available to order like expected. So I ordered it in like August, and it was like expected in October. So it's like a couple months. Like I emailed them like a 2 weeks before it was meant to be delivered. It's like, oh, is it still the case that it's going to be here in October? Because I've not heard anything. I'm like, oh no, it'll be March next year.
Huh,
No, it fucking won't. Like I'll cancel that. And then I actually found that one. It was being sold by like a computer store that had like a pro audio section online. And
weird.
I think it's either like a 2018 or 2019 Jackson Pro series. Um, but it's brand new. And I'm sure it's just been sat in this computer store where no one has ever gone looking for a guitar because why would you? And it's like it was in perfect condition. Um, and it was like £800 or something like that when like the new Jackson Pro series are 1100 or something.
Hmm.
And I'd heard some people complain about the quality control on some of the newer ones. Like the crackle finish isn't really my thing for a black metal application anyway, so that looks cooler. The views seem to be better, and it's a lot cheaper, so it's a win
Right.
on all fronts. I've I've had like a few friends. A friend messaged me literally 2 days ago, showing me a road that he's just bought, and I'm looking forward to copying. But yeah, it's a gorgeous guitar. I really like. Because it's white. Like you use like paint and blood and things, shows up more and it makes it look cool. So that's another win.
Is there any gear that you're still eyeing at the moment? Doesn't even
I
have to
think that
be guitar related, like even like for studio use or anything.
the main thing that I've picked up recently, which after the EQ being the best like £70 I've spent, I got one of the torpedo captor things, like not the live one, like the massive box where you can just record the direct out of an amp and then use like the two notes wall
Yeah.
of sound afterwards. So I've been using that for like all my demoing for the last like 6 months or so. So being able to run that JCM at half volume without destroying my own hearing and getting noise complaints, and then being able to shift around things afterwards, um, is it's been so much easier to like pick up working on stuff. Whereas before it'd be like I have like a couple mics on a cab, and then part of demoing, I'm trying to experiment with different sounds anyway. So I'd be shuffling things around, and if I've not finished something in one sitting, which is rare, um, it's impossible to like replicate the sound when I'm trying to position mics and things. Whereas now I
Right.
can, you know, if the amp settings are a tiny bit different, if the cab settings are the same, it fits in enough. Um, so I've been able to work a lot more consistently, both in terms of like volume, logistics, and like matching tones between all the recordings and things, um, which has been super useful. So now that we're in a bit of a waiting period for the next album, I've been like easing myself into like writing mode again for a few months. I've sorted through all the demos that I've done over the last like 3 years, and there was like 40 to go through. Like 9 of them are basically like finished instrumental tracks. Um, some are just like 2 riffs without any drums or anything in there. Um, so there was a lot to like sort through just the process of looking out which ones are worth developing and which ones are just, I tried that out, didn't really work. So being able to go through all those and then just like start off again and have like the sound be really similar the whole way through. It's been so useful when songwriting again. Um, so yeah, I mean, like I don't want to have to go to pay for studio time every time I want a demo, and so
No.
I generally like to have pretty well fleshed out demos before we start trying to rehearse stuff. Especially like I mentioned, I'm doing more like dissonant, open song structures. They're a little bit more like convoluted, I guess. Um, if people can't like hear what is in my head based on that already, you'd just be sat there for hours and hours just trying to get through like a riff. Um, whereas if I'm able to demo stuff to a good standard, it makes the process a lot quicker. Um, I do like mixing work for other bands and stuff too. So being able to have that option, if people aren't too sure what sort of sounds they want, being able to do revisions super easily without having to reamp everything over and over again every single time. That's really beneficial too. Um, I think that only cost me like £110 used or something. Because I was considering buying more and more cabs, so they're big and they're expensive.
Yeah.
So being able to cycle through loads of different um, the dynamic IR things where you can move the different microphones in the room and things and blend them together. That's been super useful for me too.
They are cool. Are you talking about like that the Dynamount, like where the remote controlled like robot arm for the microphone and all that?
So like I guess that's probably how they did it, but like the torpedo wall of sound,
Oh, the
like
Dyne
yeah,
IR. I'm sorry. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. So yeah,
Um,
again, it's like the hybrid thing. Like I don't want to
sure.
use like amp plugins, but if I'm able to have like a real amp with a cabinet impulse, which at the end of the day is still like a cab being captured in a room, like it is a real thing. Um, that works for me. Like it's practical without being without compromising the important things. I think when I do like final recordings for the next release, I'll still probably want to mic a cab in a room. But even just for like referencing and like I say, like pre-production and sort of getting an idea of what type of sound I want. Um, the wall of sound stuff is invaluable really, rather than just going in blind and fucking about with moving a microphone an inch back or to the side or
Right.
whatever. Going on and on and on, doing multiple different things.
I I'm there is like a vibe element when it comes to recording everything the old school way, but I do think too many people romanticize, the like minutia,
Oh
you know what
yeah,
I
for sure. It's not magic. Um,
no.
it, for me, the, the whole thing with sound in gear is like people are like a lot of people will either be like, oh yeah, it really matters if I've not got like battery in my overdrive pedal and not playing the gig, it'll sound like shit. And then other
Yeah.
people will like play through anything and they're not bothered. But for me, the whole thing about like getting a sound isn't necessarily like the end result being 5% further one way or the other. It's like if you get a sound that you really like, then you tend to play better and it feels better to play. And I feel more inspired when I'm writing things when I've got a sound that works for what I'm trying to do. And especially like any time that you think of like an album that's influenced you or something, that the overall sound of it is massively important because it's like how you're presenting the work, if that makes sense. It's like it'd be the same thing if you went to see like a public speaker. Like if someone's like saying really interesting things, but in like a horrendous, like droning, monotonous voice, and like my voice is a little bit droning at times. No one wants to sit and listen to me speak for hours about really dry topics. Whereas, you could have someone that, is a more exciting presenter talking about less interesting information. It's probably going to be more engaging. Like it's quite bad, really. Like the production on an album, like I think since I've done more mixing work and I'm used to picking out details and things, if an album's drum sound sounds like shit to me, or if I just don't like it, like if it's like a really trebly kick trigger, like I'm going to turn it off within 30 seconds. I can't do it. Which, I might be wrong for doing that. I'm sure there's loads of great albums that I'm missing out on because the production is just not to my taste. But I think it is really important. And when I think of Slayer albums, like you can hear the guitar sound on it. Like if you think of like South of Heaven, you can hear like the bit of reverb on the guitar and the way that they sort of harmonize in it. Like, when I think of like Darkness Descends, like the amount of reverb and delay when he's screaming merciless death at the top of his lungs, like that matters to me. And like the super scoop guitar sound on that matches that. Like the guitar sound on Venom stuff fits what they're doing. And I think the main thing with gear and sound is it just has to fit what you're trying to communicate with the music. And as long as it does that, then it served its purpose. Like I may or may not like it. Like what you're trying to communicate might not be the thing, but that's fine too. But, like guitar sound is meant to help communicate what the whole album is about. Um, like even like the guitar sound on like Turbo by Judas Priest, like it fits with like the synth layers that they added in on that and stuff, like the physical and things makes it sound like that much more like 80s sounding, for lack of a better word. And obviously, you can achieve the same results with different gear, but as long as you're able to get something that excites you as a musician and makes the whole atmosphere of the song work as it's intended to, then that would be a success in my mind when I'm picking out what gear to use on an album or not.
Which just kind of talking pet peeves when listening to music for the first time, by the way. Um, I'd I'd have to say overly electronic sounding drums or just
Yeah,
stuff where they've just done an awful lot of electronic sounds and sound effects to I guess in an attempt to make parts hit in a different way to kind of change the dynamic, and it
yeah,
just sounds like this doesn't sound real. Like,
yeah.
you know what
This
I
is a
mean?
funny story. So for a brief period, we had a drummer who was into slam,
Hmm.
and he used to use triggers. On principle, I'm not going to say that triggers are always not the thing to do. I understand that they have their purpose in certain music, but the particular triggers that he liked to use were like the really trebly, like like the kick
Sure.
is higher pitched than the
Yeah.
snare drum sort of thing. And every time we'd rehearse, he'd like, "Oh, Kieran, can you plug my triggers into the desk?" He's like, "Oh yeah, sure." And then as soon as I'm over there, I just take the treble like control on that channel and just turn it off. It's like you're not having a fucking kick drum in my fucking band. Like it's not happening. Because like I'll turn albums off if they have that on. Like Morbid Angel can like get away with it. Like that amount of like sort of triggered sound I can live with. When it's not super overbearing, but when it's just like the loudest fucking thing in the mix, it feels like all I can hear is just like I'm getting worked up just thinking about it. Like it really pisses me off. Like it sucks.
Hmm.
I want the like when I listen to like a death metal album, if it's like an incantation thing where the kick is just like rumbling underneath it with the bass like sat right above it, that to me is perfect. It's like I want the bass drum to sound like it's rumbling rather than
Oh yeah.
like what the fuck am I gonna do with like, that sucks. But, yeah,
Well,
drum sound is a massive one.
oh yeah. Well, we'll use that as a jumping point to go into our final topic. Uh, top four favorite death metal bands and or albums.
So Morbid Angel is one. Um, like Altars of Madness is still probably my favorite death metal album of all time. Um, with that previous Slam drummer that we had one time, I asked him if he'd ever listened to it when we were 4 hours away from home, and he said, "No, I've never bothered. Why would I? Everything they did has been improved upon by bands since then." And I should have left him there on that statement alone. Like that was sacrilegious to me. Like Altars of Madness is like a pinnacle for me. Um, Death is definitely a close second. Um, and I probably, depending on what mood I'm in, it's probably either Leprosy or Symbolic that I'd pick as my favorite Death album. They've both got qualities that I love. The more simple cutthroat stuff on Scream Bloody Gore, and some of the songs on Symbolic are just like beautiful. Um, in more recent times, Vitriol is definitely a big one for me. Um, I know that Kyle has talked a lot about how he wants to put emotion into death metal again, and I think that's why it resonates with me more. Coming from more of a black metal background, like it just seems to hit certain nails on the head in particular ways that a lot of other death metal doesn't. Um, Without sacrificing like straight to the point, just brutal intensity and aggression. Like he's able to deliver things like with passionate sincerity that's not overshadowed by like compromising on anything else that makes death metal what it should be. In my opinion, as a fourth,
I probably should have prefaced this with you can throw in black metal too.
yeah, I mean, I guess at the moment, if I were to pick another sort of couple bands that have been big, I've spoken about Sparky Gardy a lot, like over this conversation. But between them and Miss Sturming, they've been you know, they've introduced a lot of aggression into black metal in different ways. Um, that's shifted the way that I think about black metal when I listen to it and when I write it. It's sort of been like a transition between. I guess the best way I can describe it is a lot of the old like Emperor stuff sounds and feels cold, whereas a lot of that stuff like really feels like fiery. Um, and I'm sure one of the Miss Sturming songs translates to like, or I think the first album might translate to "Song of Fire and Chaos," and it's like the perfect title for that album. All the stuff in there, it's like they are songs of fire and chaos, um, and that's been a big, trying to incorporate elements of like fire in music when I'm writing it, has been, you know, when you just have that in the back of your mind when you're trying to write stuff, you're not trying to write things in a particular musical style, but just having like fire in the back of your head when you're trying to play things. I'd describe a lot of Morbid Angel riffs as having the same sort of things. And when you listen to Rapture or something, it sounds like a riff that got fire crawling all through it. So I guess that's five. But those are probably my top five at the moment. With Atlas being an honourable mention too. But the way that they're able to make nightmares into a musical device is really impressive and the unsettling in the best possible way.
Hell yeah, amazing list. Well, man, uh, yeah, that covers all the questions and talking points I had.
Cool.
First, I want to thank you for coming on, and I'll give you the floor to plug anything else that you want to share with people.
So thanks for having me. But yeah, I guess the main thing for us at the moment is the new album coming out very early next year. There will be news on it coming out, depending on when this goes up, probably a few weeks later. So before the end of this year. So that's going to be coming out on Vendetta Records on all formats. So that should be getting distribution throughout Europe and the UK in particular. I don't know if there are plans for US distribution as well. It's shipping costs stuck at the moment, but I'm sure if people want to find it, if they look at the Vendetta pages, then they'll be able to find out where it will be available from. Yeah, it's been 6 years in the making. There's a lot of personal turmoil poured into it after lots of deaths that I dealt with. So it's a very personal record that I'm incredibly passionate about. So um, give it a listen if it's your sort of thing when it comes out. Um, Hopefully you find something valuable in it.
Well, there you have it. Uh, Thank you again, Kieran, and thank you for everybody watching. I will include links down below. And with that, this is Rigs of Death Metal signing off. Thank you.